So Ross from Scottish Water is going to talk about his journey. So a little bit of background of Ross. Ross started his career in 2012 with Scottish Water as an asset management apprentice.
I don't look older.
Yeah, I was going to say you look younger. So in 2021, he became the technical team manager and established the asset, risk and reliability team, responsible for developing risk and reliability products to enable decision makers to make operational and strategic decisions to Scottish Water assets in line with the Scottish Water strategic ambitions. There was no way I was going to remember any of that. So Ross is going to talk about his journey with, I'm going to say barrier management.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ross may say BowTies.
Thanks very much. So privileged to be here this morning and to speak to you today about the risk transformation journey that Scottish Water's undertaken. As Paul very kindly introduced, I'm Ross McCorrisken and I lead the wastewater risk and reliability team. As I said, we're a new team to the business. We wanted to have a centralised hub for risk decision making. All will become clear in the kind of coming slides where we start to talk about how we are set out as a business. So just a couple of brief introductions around who are Scottish Water, as it may be in the name, but just a couple of facts about us as a business. So we are the single national provider of water and wastewater services across Scotland. We're one of the biggest critical infrastructure investors at 4.4 billion. We've got 230 wastewater treatment works and over 1,800 wastewater catchments. We have inner city urban environments to rural and small scale supplies, a very varied asset base and very varied staff and background. So just a little bit about where we've come from. So originally, Scottish Water was owned and operated by 10 regional councils across Scotland. Then in 1996, we were a merger into 3 regional water authorities, North, West and East. And then in 2002, we all came together to be one big happy family, which is Scottish Water, the single national utility provider for Scotland. So just worth calling that out because that's the history of our organisation, that we were lots of disparate organisations that have over time gradually merged together. So lots of practices, experiences and the types of assets and commission and build styles that we've had in the past. So today we're really going to focus on what we refer to as service risk. So I'm very conscious I'm in a room full of safety professionals. So our real aim that we're trying to introduce is that asset serviceability risk. But Scottish Water's principal mission really is to protect public health and the environment. So fundamentally it is to provide drinking water that is safe to customers and to return that wastewater to the environment which is safe, so protecting the environment. As an industry, we've got a number of challenges and expectations that we could see. So we've got an ageing asset base that are going to require increased levels of investment. We've already heard mentioned climate change, so extreme weather impacting on asset capacity capability. We've got a drive to achieve net zero, a forecast population change. So in Scotland, the demographic is really interesting. We've got a real shift from west to east. Coincidentally, all of our capacity is in the west, not the east. But one of the biggest challenges we have at the minute is evolving customer expectations. So the standard of service that the customer expects to 5-10 years ago to where we are today is completely different. So that's created some fundamental challenges. So at the outset of establishing the wastewater risk team, there was lots of avenues that we could go. Is it safety risk? Is it service risk? Is it asset serviceability? And what we wanted to do was have a direction statement so that we're all pulling in the same direction. We heard some of the themes earlier on around that. And effectively what we wanted is that risk is managed through the wastewater life cycle using a single, clear, well-defined and credible framework that's dynamic and reflective of our operations. So we'll have that done in a fortnight probably. But really the kind of core underpinning is that it's managed by staff who are engaged in part of that transformation. It provides value to Scottish Water and our key stakeholders. It's dynamic and flexible enough to meet the challenges of the future. It's transformational in the output, so we've got some things here about AI and emerging technologies, but we're just keen to not limit ourselves to what we've always done. And it's linked to wider business transformation. So a little bit about how we conduct risk analysis and evaluation in the team. So we operate 6 core products, which is our asset health tool, our criticality tool. So our asset health tool starts to quantify the likelihood of failure, and our criticality tool starts to quantify the impact of failure. So just for approximate numbers, there's around 1,800 wastewater treatment works, around 3,500 pumping stations, similar number of combined sewer overflows all over the country. So it's trying to get an output that's usable at scale. So to support that, we use a system definition, which allows people to understand the context of the asset base that we have. And we've also got our BowTies tool, which links to our barrier-based risk management system. And we present that to people underpinned by our reliability framework and our risk management framework. And what we're doing here is that that's published on a single portal to the business. So it's all about accessibility, because we've got around 4,000 staff, so reasonably big numbers. But what we want to do is incremental releases of tools. That's not going to be a big bang impact. We wanted to introduce incremental tools that give people the best value. But one of the most important things is that in analysis, it should provide a disproportionately greater benefit than the effort to produce it. So I don't know, in the room we've all probably heard some of that this morning, that we can be stuck in analysis paralysis and you can end up really, really obsessing over facts and figures. So what we're trying to get is a view that gives us enough results back, but that we're not over-analysing them as well. So a little bit about our BowTies implementation journey. So where we started here was that in the past across our business, management of service risk was highly investment focused, and there was a limited engagement with proactive risk control. The ownership, there was multiple teams, we've heard this morning, multiple repositories of risk, all common themes. The commonality of standards, so I spoke about how our organisation has evolved from 10 to 3 to 1. So commonality of standard across the company was variable. But probably our biggest challenge was the change in demographic. So we've got a number of experienced planning staff that were going to come to retirement age. So we've got a lot of staff departing the business through natural retirement. But what we've also got is that the employment demographic now. A lot of our staff, we've got over 1,000 staff with 25 years service. So really experienced people within the business, but employment demographic, the days of a job for life probably aren't what they were before. So we've really dined out in the past on that knowledge and wisdom of the staff being in their head. So how do we start to operationalise that? It's a good link to today. So we started with, and for those of you who know me, I like a quote, so if you would indulge me. But we always like to go, take the Henry Ford through. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. So traditionally, we were Excel and Access database obsessed. Everything was in a spreadsheet, it was on paper. So what we thought was, how do we take a fundamental difference? And we wanted to look out with the industry. So then along comes Paul. So what we done was, we had that question, can we use BowTies or barrier-based risk for our service risk assessments? And that was about taking an approach completely different to what we had done in the business in the past. So across that journey, our first step was engaging with Alistair and Paul, who've been instrumental in helping us and guiding us through this journey to help bring that external perspective and to bring a different view to support us. We had a period of trial, so what we've done was tested tools and techniques. Does that apply to our asset base? Because we can go really far in the future, but do you have the data to support that risk assessment? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? So we tested over the period of a year a number of tools and techniques. We then eventually ended landing with BowTies XP Enterprise as a software solution with XP Incident and Audit. So we went wholesale. Moving towards the future, now it's about starting to operationalise that within the business and starting to really get people using the tool, and I'll use a couple of examples of where that's been in play. A couple of things about delivering change. So we've done this very differently to some change projects. So this was very much a bottom-up. So the design mantra that we used was by planners for planners. That's what we call our risk engineers. So one of the successes in this for us was engaging specialist support early. As I say, that has been instrumental, the support that we've had from Alistair and Paul across our implementation, to challenge us, to bring different perspectives, put us into contact with other people, because we've all got similar challenges and we can all learn from each other. Test and try before you build and implement. So we had some stuff that we thought, when you read a brochure, that'd be a great idea to do, but actually applying that in practice just didn't work. And we found some stuff that we thought wouldn't have worked that we've really built. End user engagement. So throughout the build, what we wanted to do was build this with users on the journey with us. So who's going to use this? And one of the key things was to actually make this stick, was about finding examples of where using a good risk assessment process, or by doing good risk analysis and evaluation, that it's delivered a benefit to people. And that's where we've got a real groundswell. We've been really fortunate that people from shop floor up are actually really engaging. And again, that phased release of tools and techniques. So don't just go from zero to hero, have a phased approach and learn as you go. And the last part is training and coaching. So, and that training and coaching is beyond simply just a software solution. It's about actually introducing risk as a skill set and actually valuing that. We know we talk about engineering safety as skill sets in the business, but being risk practitioners is also a skill set that we want to value as a business. So on to a couple of successes. So what does this actually look like? Because it's all good. So first part was our enterprise risk assessment process. So the challenge that we had, as I say, we've got large volume of assets and locations, over 9,000 in the wastewater. There's 500 people affected by the change. We've got 100 largely static data sets, and our EM solution, or our CMMS, is going to fundamentally change in the next 3 years. So nice small challenge. Couple that with an internal audit review, which one of the actions that was delivered to my team was required to design and implement a comprehensive and dynamic service risk assessment process for all our assets in the wastewater service. So every single asset was to have a level of quantitative or qualitative risk assessment carried out. Again, 9,000 assets. And just to give context to the size of my team, we are a team of myself plus 9. So 1,000 assets each. So that took us to my next quote of the day, which is Peter Drucker quote. So there's nothing so useless as doing something efficiently, something that shouldn't be done at all. Does every asset require a bespoke, created risk assessment? Absolutely not. So what we've implemented is a tiered approach to our BowTies. So we've got tier 1 to 4. And one of the biggest successes is this tier 1, which is our management approach or policy level. So this becomes the granny book, the template, which for a lot of our asset groups, so asset types, asset classes, process types. And what we're then able to do is use global-local relationships across the asset portfolio, which is that we've got the corporate standard, which can then be applied. And again, the type of risk planner and the diversity of the asset base, what this really gave a really good example of was we could have someone as a risk planner in North region, they're process engineering to background, and we're asking them to conduct a risk assessment on a mechanical question. So they've got access to mechanical support, but actually giving them the right questions to ask or the right data to get in the first place. That was one of the key drivers in this. And it also gives us a good view of, we've got what we believe the corporate standard to be, how is that being applied across the asset base? But to build these corporate templates, well, I'm sure some of us in the room might have experience of this. We can't just work in isolation, so collaboration and build has been really key. And that's where we get that feedback, which is that the global risk assessments allow people to take pan-Scotland best practice and apply it to local assets. Because what we find is that it can be quite siloed as an organisation. We've got lots of teams. Some of our teams are actually, closer to Europe than they are to Glasgow, to where the team's based. So it was a really interesting point here that there's lots of good practice exists within the business. So in that point of, and I mean even in the theme of today, capturing wisdom and getting people's knowledge. So we've got these really skilled people in the business. This is a great opportunity for them to feed their knowledge back in to capture that. One of the second examples that we've got, which we feel is a good practice, so Greater Glasgow Bioresource System. So one of the byproducts from the wastewater treatment process is wastewater sludge. We've typically referred to it as a waste product, but towards net zero, circular economy, we really need to think different with what we do with that. It's not a landfill product, it's full of minerals, it's full of other recyclable materials, so it is a resource that we can use. So in Glasgow, we operate the Greater Glasgow Bioresource System. It takes our 4 largest treatment works. We pump sludge all the way across Glasgow and we treat it. So roughly 40% of the company's bioresource goes through this one pipeline in this one sludge treatment centre. Within that asset, we've got a number of challenges. First one being principally we've got complex PFI assets. So we've got the treatment plants operated by a PFI operator that returns to Scottish Water in 2026. Quite high hazard activity, challenging access and legacy design. So the first phase of this was constructed in 1964, chamber access. The example shown here is remote actuation of valves. The pipeline operates between 3 to 7 bar, so that's one of our higher pressure pipelines. I know that might not be for some people in the room what they could class as high pressure, but throughput and volume, as I say, 40%. We've got bespoke and aged equipment. I always like to talk about these pumps everywhere I go. These are lay part sludge pumps. They're Whitehead and Pool, complete bespoke application. Really struggle to actually find an alternative vendor to replace these. We've got a significant impact on third-party national infrastructure and environmental impact of failure. So what you can see in that third-party one is that's the M8 motorway. Glasgow Airport's just out of shot. So traffic volumes going through there, and should we have a catastrophic failure of that pipeline, we could cause significant disruption. So now the horror story that's been out there. What we found was that there are so many challenges, so many teams involved in the operation that you can't really see the wood for the trees. So what we done was we had a series of facilitated workshops. For the first time, we were able to have a single risk model for the system. And within that, we found 217 unique risk controls. When we actually done, you've said you're going to do a control, because it's all about the barriers. We know the threats and we know the consequences, but what are we actually doing about it? And what we found was that nearly 60% of these controls were allocated to a team with only 3 FTE. So it wasn't their full-time job. So 40% of the entire business's sludge rests on 3 people. So for the first time as a business, we were able to see that. Couple of things that we learned on that. So barrier metadata was really key. So actually understanding, and again, we'll learn on this through time, but what we wanted to actually have was clear barrier types, the criticality, the effectiveness, and who was responsible. So actually having that, instead of free text or having open forum answers, actually starting to have clear metadata, we were able to do much better reporting. Again, thinking with diagrams, again, we've mentioned some of the other kind of core books that we would talk about in the barrier space, but actually presenting, so these are our 2 key threat lines, which most often fail. So we normally see valve failures, either scour and isolation or air valve failure. Those were 2 of our most common failure methods. And as you can see, we don't have adequate control in place. But we thought we were actually doing really well in that space. We did numerous projects, numerous people working on that, but when we actually laid that out, we weren't actually having the same availability. So what's changed? What have we learned? What have we done differently as a result of the risk assessment? Because I think that's one of the key things, is that doing the risk assessment, the analysis and the evaluation is all good, but you want to actually operationalise that and start to do something with it. So we've now got a bioresource strategy. We've increased the operational FTE. So but being able to not get lost in the detail and show a really simple visual picture to some of our decision makers, we were able to have a really clear output. We've now got specialist resource recruited, so we've now got a team who manage what is a specialist asset, that pipeline management and the treatment centre. We're taking a very different approach. It's a reliability approach taken to assets. Most of our maintenance approaches typically are run to fail in most cases across our business, but we've now got a reliability approach. We've refreshed the contingency planning, and we now understand the system effects a lot better. So that was just 2 kind of key examples of where we've actually applied barrier-based risk management. So what's next? So the next part for us is, now that we've got risk assessments out within the field and that we've got people using them, we want to develop the implementation use case for audit to improve the validity of these assessments. Skills, so we want to develop and expand the training and coaching of our practitioners and facilitators to include incident and audit. That's the key for us, was actually having that defined role of practitioners and facilitators within our business. And these are people who are shop floor level. They are using the tool for their benefit. So having good facilitators in the team, so he's not here today, but there's a chap, Stephen Watson, in the team. So Steve's been key to driving this, and it's by me for you, and Steve's a familiar face to them, so that shop floor delivery method. The next part we want to do is develop that global, local and chaining to capture system effects. So one of the biggest things that challenges that we've got so many disparate assets across a system. How do you understand the system effect of performance? So, you know, we spoke about climate change. So a good example could be, should we have inclement weather? How does that affect the pumping assets, which then affect the treatment works, which affect our sewers, which is spills? So lots of system effects thinking to do. So really interesting to see how we can start to link that together. And the last part is that reporting. So using the API tools to develop insight reporting to drive more value from the assessments. Next year will be the go live of a new EAM system, so moving from Ellipse to Maximo. So a lot of these controls and activities, we want to actually link them to tangible activities within the EAM solution, so that we can then actually prove that we're doing these tasks, but also that the tasks are being managed and scheduled in a centralised system as we go through. And that concludes presentation. So not sure if we do questions or.
Yeah, I think we've got time for questions. I look at Isaac because he tells me everything I should be doing. Any questions?
So you're doing this for wastewater. Is this something that you're planning to move out across Scottish Water in its entirety?
Yep, so what we've now started to do is that the technique is now being used in our water service. So water have got a very specific regulatory requirement. So it's, I used to always be able to quote it and then say it was really, but I think it's BS 15975, or the Drinking Water Safety Standard. So water risk assessments have got a very prescriptive manner in which they have to be carried out. But for a lot of their general serviceability and maintenance questionnaires, they're now starting to use a similar approach.
That table?
Yeah. Interesting was, I think it's the global local approach. That's also something we're looking into as well and trying to implement. Just wondering if you've got any lessons learned on doing that process and how you do it again.
Yeah, so I think probably really when we first started talking about that was not to just jump into this on scale. So the Glasgow sludge system was the first one that we started to do that. So what we found was that the initial risk assessment was a monster. It was huge. But what we've now done is subdivided it into system nodes. So that was one of the examples of using that global local. One of the things that we've really started to do as well is when we're doing HAZOPs or hazards now, is to actually start at the beginning. So when we define those system nodes, is to actually link that through to the risk assessment, because by design reliability, safety into what we do. So I would say don't go too big too quick was probably one of the lessons we learned, but finding a case where you're actually actively going to use it and the people require it was probably what we learned.
I think we also, the safety model is very comprehensive, and when we've turned it into BowTies, it's huge. And it's about, okay, what is the important bit that we need the members to know, that this is what they actually need to drive. If they start driving this, the rest will follow on. And that's the hard bit, I think. Yeah.
I think it's going along the same lines, but if you take an example of a bow tie, do you provide a kind of overpopulated bow tie and ask people to remove the superfluous stuff, or do you start with a very thin bow tie and ask people to add stuff in which applies to the local situation?
Yep, so again, that's very much an evolving picture, because what we don't want to do is create a tick box exercise for people. So I think we've probably found what we think is the sweet spot for us. So we give them a typically what we'll do is populate the threats, consequence and barriers, but the bit that we tend to leave open is the metadata underneath that, as in how critical is that control, who does that control, and then the part that we also do is when we apply this locally, we start to capture the local detail within that, so within some of the open text boxes, and that's been something that creating that, because what we tend to find is, oh, Paul knows that site. Okay, great. So how do you get that knowledge out of their head linked into a barrier? So that's what we do typically.
Anyone else?
You mentioned you got 9,000 asset locations and you got limited resources within your team. How do you manage using your limited resources to do the BowTie? You rely on the end user or use your own team?
Yep. So what I'll do, actually, it's probably a very briefly back to that slide, which one too many clicks. So in this tiered approach, the way that we own this, I should have actually said that. So tier 1 is owned by my team, and that's roughly around 40 BowTies that we would have. Tier 2, 3, that's typically the end user. So that's where my team would be the facilitators. We then have got practitioners that sit underneath that. So that there's probably around 60 people across the tier 2 and tier 3. But what we do is we link it to criticality. So that's where that suite of products that the team produces. So what we do is we have a bespoke BowTie for assets that we've identified as critical. And for assets that are identified as non-critical, we apply the generic controls within the policy. That's how we've managed the numbers so far.
Anyone else? Alan?
I think you mentioned chaining at one point. You chained upstream assets, downstream assets that cause and effects. How well received you found that sort of analysis is quite easy to understand.
Yeah, so that was really interesting for us to actually put that out. So within the sludge system, it goes that we've got storage, pumping, pipelines, treatment, and what we started to do was we picked some end effects. So it'd be failure of the pipeline, which then leads into the pumps one, and that, because we've got so many disparate teams, that was actually really, because the team who do the network side of it are completely separate to the team who do the treatment side of it. So to actually let the two teams be aware of each other's consequential risks. Another really good example of this was development operations. So we deal with thousands of customer connections, and one of our key business drivers is to enable sustainable and inclusive economic growth. So not being a blocker to development, housing particularly, and industrial development. But the teams who review these designs had they would just take this generic standard for standoff and apply that to the pipeline. But what they didn't actually realise was how critical it was that we had appropriate way leaves in, that should something happen to that pipe. And it was only them, when they actually seen that, they've now changed some of their approaches for work around the pipeline, because they can see the system effect and they can click through it.
Last question. Okay. So I'd like to thank Os for giving his time away today and telling that his story. We have a gift for you. Oh, you probably have to put it on some sort of register and declare it, but it's a nice little gift for you to take away. And would you like to show your appreciation to Ross, please?
Thanks very much.